Okay, today we're going to learn Eruvin Daf Lamed Tchet. Today's daf is sponsored in honor of Ann Goldhirsch on her birthday. Happy birthday to our #1 Daf Yomi learner. Love Barry, Aaron, and Ezra. And by Yael in honor of her sister Shifra on her birthday. A lot of birthdays today. We're going to start at the new Mishnah on Lamed Chet Amud Aleph. What's great about today's daf and the upcoming dafim is that they're all about cases of Yom Tov and Shabbat coming right up against each other. We're going to get to Rosh Hashanah. It's amazing when that happens, right? And we're right away going to start talking about how do we view, right? We know that people call Rosh Hashanah Yom Ha'arichta, one long day, and it's different than Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyot. So we're going to get into all that, not today. But today we're going to talk about when you have Yom Tov next to Shabbat. It's not exactly our situation because our situation is Yom Tov is Shabbat, okay, right? Whereas on Shabbat, we're going to have both Rosh Hashanah and Shabbat on the same day, and then next to another day of Yom Tov. But the concepts are basically very similar. Daf Michelle this week dealt all about Rosh Hashanah and how it comes up in the daf and connecting ideas from the daf to the concept of Rosh Hashanah in general. So if you want to listen to that. And we're going to start now with the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Yom Tov HaSamuch LeShabbat, okay, whether Yom Tov falls on Friday or Yom Tov falls on Sunday, and it's right next to Shabbat. So what do you do with your Eruv? Okay, do you do one Eruv for both? Okay, there's a few questions. Number one, does one Eruv cover you for both days? Or if it doesn't, can you do Eruvs in two different directions? Okay, so that's what Rabbi Eliezer is going to say. Yom Tov HaSamuch LeShabbat, so whichever way it comes out, Ma'arev Adam Shnei Eruvin, you can do two different Eruvs. Ve'omer, Eruvi b'rishon lemizrach, u'b'sheni lema'arav. You can say, day number one, I want to go in the direction of the east. Day number two, I want to go in the direction of the west. At this point, it sounds like, although much later in the Gemara, toward the end of today's daf, we're going to see maybe not exactly this way, but it sounds like theoretically, you could do a Eruv, 2,000 amas out in one direction for the first day, and 2,000 amma in the other direction for the second day. You could also say, you could also say, and they're just giving examples, this is the exact same thing, just the reverse, and obviously there wouldn't be a difference between them, okay, or the other direction. Or you could say, again, this is really all one and the same, but instead of making two different Eruvs, you're basically saying, I want an Eruv for day number one. And for day number two, I don't want any Eruv, which means, remember, if you do an Eruv to the Mizrach, you only, let's say whatever direction, you only get 2,000 Amma from the place that you did your Eruv. You lose the 2,000 Amma from your city. You only have 2,000 Amma from your city to the Eruv, but you don't have a whole radius in all directions. So yours basically saying, one day I want to go visit a friend out there, but the second day I want to be able to go 2,000 amma outside my city in the other direction. So you basically don't want any Eruv on the second day. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, that works. Or you could even say, I want my Eruv to be on the second day, and today it's going to be kivnei iri. The Chachamim, okay, so basically, in other words, what Rabbi Eliezer says, and we're going to come back to this phrase a lot today, Shtei Kedushot. They're two different sanctities. What happens on one day is not relevant for the second day. In other words, they're two totally separate days. You could do different things for each. That's what he says. Now we're going to see the rabbis who have a different approach. Chachamim omrim, o ma'arev l'ruach achat, o eno ma'arev kol ikar. It's all or nothing. Either you go in one direction, or if you don't want to on the second day have your Eruv, well then don't make any Eruv at all. O ma'arev l'shnei yamim, o eno ma'arev kol ikar. Or you can do one Eruv for both days, or don't make an Eruv at all. Now, that sounds like the same thing. In other words, it's different wording, but it kind of means the same thing. It just means whatever you do for both days applies to both days. And whichever direction you go in, that's the direction you're going for both days and not the other. So the Gemara is going to immediately ask, what's the difference between these two lines? Why do we say them like that? Okay. Ketzad ya'aseh. So according to Chachamim, how do you do this? Molicho barishon u'machshich alav v'notzlo. Okay, what do? You bring your Eruv. This we already learned. And this is the rabbi's approach who says basically it's all or nothing. Whatever applies the first day applies also the second day. But you have to go on the first day. Umachshich alav. You have to wait till it gets dark, meaning as we know, your Erev has to be there all of Ben Hashmashot, all of twilight. V'notzlo, then you take your food home. Ubalo basheni, machshi chalav. Then you go the second day. You make sure the food stays there, Ben Hashmashot. Then you can do with it whatever you want. Ochlo, if you want, you can eat it. Ubalo, and then you can obviously go as you please, 2,000 amma around there. And now you get rewarded for your halicha, meaning you can now walk wherever you want. Your eruv works. And you also mistaker be'eruvo. It's just like a cute phrase they're saying. You also get to eat your food if you want. So, you don't have to waste the food. You get to eat it. Ne'echal eruvo larishon ve'ein eruvo lasheni. What happens if you left your food there and it got eaten and now there's no more food? Or you brought your eruv home and now someone ate it, and this happens in my house all the time, right? Somebody leaves something for later and they forget to tell everybody and somebody else eats it, right? They were planning to take it to school the next day. So what if your food's gone? So Amar Rabbi, then your second day doesn't work. Okay, it's no good, your eruv for the second day, because now what's the issue here? Amar Rabbi Eliezer modim atem li shehen shtei kedushot. If you're saying that if right, they're basically saying Rabbi Eliezer is saying there's some inconsistency with what you said, because you said that whatever you do for one applies to the other. Basically, they're all one and the same. You have to go all in one direction, right? You're going to do an eruv, it's going to be for both days. You're not going to do an eruv, it's going to be for both days. You can't do one and one because it's all one kedusha. Well, if it's all one kedusha, then why, if it gets eaten the first day, does it not apply to the second day? Theoretically, what you're saying is, and that's what Rabbi Eliezer says, don't you agree then that it's shtei kedushot? Because if you have to put a separate eruv each day, that seems to imply that these are two different sanctities and they each need their own eruv. So basically, he has a question with their approach. What we're going to see in the Gemara is some more Tannaitic sources that have more elaborate discussions between the two, and we get to see the back and forth, and we'll try to understand what the rabbi's approach is. Because if they really do hold it's one kedusha, then theoretically, right, if we say, like, let's just take Rosh Hashanah as an example, that it's a Yom Ha'arichta, that it's a long day, then basically we should say, whatever you do starting from, right, this year it would be Erev Shabbat, would apply across the board to both days. So, and even if it's not Rosh Hashanah, the rabbis are still viewing, right, like let's say this year Shavuot was, this past year, Shavuot came out on Motzei Shabbat, on Sunday. So we had Shavuot, we had Shabbat, and then Shavuot. So again, if you say it's all one Kedusha, then you would say whatever you do the first day would apply across the board. You don't need to put a new Eruv down. So there's a separate problem, which is it was Shabbat and you can't bring your food the second day. That's another problem that we talked about before. But assuming it was the reverse, it was Friday and then Shabbat, that should work. So now the Gemara starts off and says, L'ruach chat ma'inihu l'shnei amin. Going back to this line I said was very problematic of the rabbis. The rabbi said, either you're ma'arev, one direction. Now what does it mean, one direction? It means one direction, ma'inihu l'shnei amin, for both days. Well, then the rabbis say, ma'arev l'shnei yamim, o ino ma'arev kol ikar. So l'shnei yamim, ma'inihu, what does it mean for both days? It means l'ruach achad, in one direction. So basically, l'ruach achad implies for both days, and l'shnei yamim implies in one direction. So they didn't need to say both phrases. So why did this, right? Hainu kamaita. Then we end up that the first phrase is the exact same thing as the second phrase. So they change it a little bit and they say, hachi ka'amar le Rabbanan le Rabbi Eliezer. This is really, it's short, it's an abridged form of a real discussion that happened between them. Rabbi Eliezer, you say it's two different kedushot. But theoretically, if I asked you, could you take one day, let's say it was just Shabbat, could you say, I want the first, you put down two Eruvs when Shabbat starts, and you say, the first half of the day I want to go north, and the second half of the day I want to go south. Could you do that? Of course not, right? Even Rabbi Eliezer would agree. So the rabbis say, don't you agree that that doesn't work? Amar lahem. So he answers them, aval, of course you're right. Yeah, of course I agree with you, that wouldn't work. So then they say back to him, Kashem she'em arvin, and this is all implied in those two lines, right? L'ruach achad, not l'shtei ruchot, that's within one day. And then he says, yes, I agree. And then they say, Kashem she'em arvin liyom achad, chetziol l'darom v'chetziol l'tzafon, just like in one day you can't do half to the south and half to the north. Kach ema arvin l'shnei amim yom echad lemizrach v'yom echad lema'arav. So they say likewise with 2 days. It's basically what they're saying is it's basically like saying half. Okay, because again, the rabbis view this all as one kedusha, as one long day. So if you view it as one long day, it's the same thing as saying half. Now, what's Rabbi Elazar's response? Obviously, Rabbi Elazar, hatam kedusha achat. When you're talking about 1 day, it's one sanctity. Hacha shtei kedushot, right? But I view this as 2 kedushot. Okay, so now, Amar lehem Rabbi Elazar, again, we're getting into a very elaborate discussion here. What they're saying is, this is what's going on behind the sines. Rabbi Elazar then would say to them, אתם מודיעים שאם ערב ברגליו ביום ראשון, מערב ברגליו ביום שני, or נאכל עירובו ביום ראשון, אין יוצא עליו ביום שני, and this is what the rabbi said at the end of the Mishnah, right? They didn't say the first case, but they said the second case. Don't you agree with me? Now, what's ma'arev beraglav? Ma'arev beraglav is instead of putting food out, I walk physically to the spot and I'm there. Now, that's actually stronger because I'm actually physically there. It's not symbolic. I'm standing there. It's a little problematic because I go back home after and I sleep at home, which shows that I didn't really want to be Konesh Vita. But anyway, he says, don't you agree with me that if you walked physically there on the first day, that, right, I would still have to, right, and then I went back home and went to sleep in my house, I would have to physically go the second day. Don't you agree with me about that? And don't you agree with me that, and this they said in the Mishnah, if the Eruv gets eaten on the first day, right? And there's no Eruv left there. You didn't put a new one out. You wouldn't be able to go on the second day. Amrulo aval. So they said, yeah, I do agree with you about that. So halai sheik dushoten. So then they say, look, we put, right? Rabbi Elazar put them in a corner and said, look, there you see, it's 2 different sanctities. So what do they answer? Rabbanan sipuke mesapka lehu, v'hacha lechumra, v'hacha lechumra. The rabbis don't really believe 100% that it's one kedusha, one sanctity. But what do they say? We have to be concerned that maybe this is viewed as one sanctity. And therefore, they go lechumra in all directions. They're stringent everywhere. What does that mean? Again, they say, you can't make your Eruv in 2 different directions because you can't, we view this as one day, as if one sanctity. Therefore, you can't be living in 2 different places on the same day, right? Just like a half day you can't split. This is like one whole day, even though it's 2 days. However, since maybe it's 2 sanctities, therefore, if your Eruv is no longer there the second day, or you physically walk there the first day to say, this is where I'm living, it's not going to help you for the second day unless you go back and stand there, okay? Or make sure there's food there. So basically, now we understand finally Chachamim Shita. It doesn't really contradict. It's just that they're worried for all possibilities. So again, we have, and this is important to build for the next thing, which is we now have 2 approaches. One is it's 2 different sanctities entirely. So according to Rabbi Elazar, you can go in either direction, right? You can have your Eruv one day there and your Eruv one day there, which again, we're going to have to see, are they really 4,000? And if you do that, you end up, each Eruv is 4,000 amma away from the other one, which is going to create other problems. But let's just assume right now that's what we're saying. You go one direction that way and one direction that way. And also, you can, right, and that's Rabbi Elazar. And the rabbis say, no, we treat this as one kedusha, but only out of suffix, okay? Only out of doubt. Maybe it's 2, maybe it's 1, and therefore we have to be stringent in all directions. Okay, now the Gemara. Sorry, I'm just remembering where we left off. Okay. Amrulo le Rabbi Elazar. Okay, now the rabbis say back to Rabbi Elazar, don't you agree with me that you can't be ma'arev? Let's say I didn't make an Eruv on Yom Tov, okay? Then it's Yom Tov. I can't now make an Eruv on Shabbat, for Shabbat. Okay, if I didn't make an Eruv from before, I can't do it on Shabbat. So what do you see? If it's 2 different Kedushot, why can't I make an Eruv on Friday afternoon for Shabbat? Amar lahen aval. He says, I do agree with you that that doesn't work. So ha like Kedusha achati. So they say, we put you in a corner now. Isn't that one Kedusha? Rabbi Elazar, hata mishum hachana. No, that's a different reason. That's because, and this is why we make an Eruv Tavshilin, right? We don't need to do this year on Rosh Hashanah, but if Yom Tov fell out on Erev Shabbat, then we make an Erev Tavshilin because theoretically you can't cook food, you can't prepare food at all, not for one day of Yom Tov to the next day. Like this year, I'll give you the relevant example, right? When Yom Tov, the second day of Yom Tov is on Motzei Shabbat, that meal, you can't prepare your food in the afternoon, right? Because you can't prepare from Yom Tov to Yom Tov or Shabbos to Yom Tov or Yom Tov to Shabbos. Every day is separate, only when it's Erev Shabbat, and because you won't be able to cook on Shabbat, we allow you, if you make an Erev Tavshilin, then we allow you to cook. It's kind of like you started your preparation before, we allow you to continue. But this is assuming there's no Eruv, right? And this is not cooking, this is for Erev Tchumin. So he says, that's why you can't do it. It's because of Hachana. It has nothing to do with Shtei Kedusha Kedusha Achad. It's just that you're not allowed to prepare on Yom Tov for Shabbat. If you did your Eruv before, then you're allowed to kind of continue it. But if you did your Erev Tchumin, right, on Erev Chag, then you could put the food back on Erev Shabbat. But not if you didn't do an Eruv at all on Erev Chag. Then you can't start making an Eruv on Friday afternoon, which is Yom Tov. But that's a totally separate issue, nothing to do with this. Okay, so that was a bunch of questions they each asked on each other. Now we're going to see another approach. Okay, we're going to have three approaches in this Braita. This Braita is actually a Tosefta. Okay, it's in the Tosefta in Eruvin. And now we're going to see three approaches. Until now we saw two. One is Safek, right? Maybe two Kedushot, maybe one, or two Kedushot. Now we're going to obviously see the third, which is it's really only one Kedusha. Okay, if you walked to your spot that you wanted to be at, you still have to walk to the spot on the second day. If it gets eaten, you can't be yotzei on the second day. Divrei Rebbe. Okay, this sounds like two kedushot. Okay, in the end, we said the rabbis also agree with this, but that's only because out of Safek. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Harei ze chamar gamal. He says, wait, if your Eruv gets eaten, he says, well, you have to worry. Now we have a different worry, that maybe it's all one kedusha. In which case, okay, what's a chamar gamal? Remember, you're the donkey, you're leading the donkey, or you're leading the camel. The camel leads from the front, the donkey leads from the back. You're stuck, you can't go either way. What are you stuck between right now? Well, if your Eruv was good, okay, even though it got eaten, if we view this all as one kedusha, then your Eruv is good and you don't have 2,000 amma outside your city in the other direction. If your Eruv is no good for the second day, and we say it's two kedushot, and therefore your Eruv was eaten, you don't have an Eruv now, you go back to having your city, which means you can't go 2,000 amma from your Eruv, only from your city. So basically, where are you allowed to walk since you're now stuck between a rock and a hard place? You're only allowed to walk 2,000 amma from the ones that overlap between your city and the Eruv. That's the only space where you can walk. You can't go out in any other direction outside your city. Okay, you're stuck. So he's got the Safek in between position. And Rashbag v'Rabbi Shmuel b'no shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch omrim, Ireh b'ragla b'rishon, ein ma'arev b'ragla b'sheni. Ne'achal irvo b'yom rishon, yotze alav b'sheni. They say, Kedusha achat entirely, right? They say, if you walked to the end of the spot where you wanted to be on Erev Chag, that would work also for Shabbat. Okay, you don't have to go back. And if your Erev was eaten, no problem. It covers you for the second day because this is all one Kedusha. So they seem to be saying Kedusha achat all the way. Okay, so we now have three approaches. Amarav, now we're going to have a little bit of a problem with Rashbag and Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch in this Braita, not because of what they say, but because of what someone else says about their approach, which makes it sound like they don't hold what it said they hold in this Tosefta. So then we're going to have to change some wording and change some things around like we've done before. Amarav, halacha ka'arba'az kenim halalu. The halacha is like the following, we don't know yet who, the following four scholars. Okay, the following four is the kenim. Va'aliba de Rabbi Eliezer. And they all hold like Rabbi Eliezer, who says, remember, shtei kedushot, two different sanctities. Damar, okay, in case you didn't remember, they say it here, Damar shtei kedushotin, okay? Be'eluhen, and here are the four Eluhen arbas kenim, Rashbag, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch. Oh, wait, that's what we just said, holds like the rabbis and to the extreme that it's only one kedusha. So now we have a big problem because the first words that he says are already problematic. He says that Rashbag and Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka say like Rabbi Eliezer, which is the exact opposite of what appears in the Tosefta. And who else? Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda stim ta'ah. Okay, the stam Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Viga de Amre, and some people say Chabinayu Rabbi Elazar, Umapik Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda stim ta'ah. Okay, and they take out. Some people say instead of Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda stim ta'ah, they take him out and they put in Rabbi Elazar. Okay, but that's not important for our purposes. Vaha Rashbag Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosher Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka ipcha shaminan lehu. They say the exact opposite. So the Gemara says ipuch. Now, ipuch we saw yesterday means switch the shitot. The person who said this said that, and the person who said that says this. That's not what they mean here. And you have to wonder why they don't mean that here, because that would have resolved some problems. But they say that they actually say the opposite of what they say, meaning keep the beginning of the Tosefta the same. When it comes to Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, let's read it again. So it starts at the top of the page. So they would now say, Irei b'ragla b'rishon, me'arei b'ragla b'sheni. You have to go the second day because it's two different kedusha. Ne'echal evuro b'rishon, ein yotzei alav b'sheni. It doesn't work for the second day if it gets eaten. So that's what they say, do that. Well, then we have a big problem with this Tosefta. Ihachi, the structure is totally wrong. Hainu Rebbe. You now have Rebbe and Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka and Rashbag saying the same thing. And the Tosefta sets it up as if there's three approaches. It starts with Rebbe, it goes to Rabbi Yehuda, right? Rebbe says, like Rabbi Eliezer, we have the in-between opinion, Rabbi Yehuda, who says Safek from all directions. And then we have a third opinion, Rashbag, Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, which now we change to basically read the same as Rebbe. That's not, it doesn't make sense from the structure of the Tosefta. So they say Ema, and this is also a little problematic in terms of the structure, but somehow this makes it, they think this is okay. V'chein amal Rashbag, and thus says Rashbag and Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, meaning, and they agree with him. Okay? The problem with saying this obviously is it's 1, 2, and then 1 again, right? And it's saying 1, right? And thus, like the previous opinion, not the one we just stated, but the one before that, it's a little bit tricky, but that's what they say, okay? For whatever reason, they don't want to switch Rebbe, okay? I'm not sure why, because that would have been a good resolution to just say the switch, right? The opinions are switched, and then we still have 3 different opinions, and then we don't have to change any wording, right? We just have to change who said what. But they don't answer that. Maybe they had some masoret that that's not the way the Tosefta went. But then we have another, and furthermore, you wonder why they didn't do this, because this would have resolved this issue also. If Rebbe holds like Rabbi Eliezer, then what's the problem? What did Rav say? Rav said the halacha is like the following 4 skenim who all hold like Rabbi Eliezer, and who's missing from the list? Rebbe. We just said that Rebbe holds like Rabbi Eliezer. V'lichshav nami Rebbe. So why isn't Rebbe in the list of Rav of all these rabbis who hold this way? So the answer, Rebbe tanale v'lo savarla. He taught this in the Braita, but he himself doesn't hold that way. Okay? So basically we say, Rebbe taught this way, and he said it in the Tosefta, but it's not his personal opinion. And then we say, Rabbanan nami tanu lavalo safrela. Why didn't we just say that about Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, and Rashbag? That would have resolved our issue. So they say, no, because Rav Gemara Gemirala. Okay? Rav had a tradition. He knew his tradition was that this is what they say. And that's why Rav said that the 4 skenim are those 4 skenim, not Rebbe. Yes, Rashbag, and yes, Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. And here we see how strong tradition is. Tradition is so strong that it overrides, right, what might be the written word. Right? This is classic, by the way, where tradition overrides often what's written. I'll give you a good example. Tkiyat shofar. Women, by law, do not have to listen to Tkiyat shofar by the words of the Gemara. It says it's a mitzvah daseh shazman grama, and nashim are exempt. However, the minhag became that women listen to shofar, and that minhag overrode halacha, and now it became obligatory for women to hear Tkiyat shofar. Which, by the way, this year obviously creates a lot of complications with, issues of getting to shul and all that. But anyway, that's a minhag. So it's a minhag that overrode the halacha. Okay, before we move on, I see there's a question about Rebbe being Rabbi Yehuda, and how could that be? So it's not Rabbi Yehuda. Rebbe is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. That's different from Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. It's a different Rabbi Yehuda. I think he was one generation earlier, if I remember correctly. And I believe, I hope I'm not wrong, it's Rabbi Yehuda bar Eli, Rabbi Eli. So that's important to know. Whenever like Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, they always have arguments. That's not Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was after that. Okay. Okay. So now we're going to have, so we now had this Braita and this Tosefta with 3 opinions. And we now say that really it wasn't 3 opinions. Notice that in the end, nobody holds that it's one Kedusha entirely, right? So we end up, we're still with the rabbis that we say it's one Kedusha, misafik, okay? But not that we hold it all the way. Kinach nafshe de Rav Huna. When Rav Huna died, Aya Rav Chisda lemirma de Rava de Rav. Rav Chisda comes in to bring a contradiction of Rav on Rav. Apparently there were some issues between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda's relationship, so I guess only after he died did he come and do this. So Rav Chisda comes and says there's a contradiction of Rav. Rav contradicts himself. Why? Did he really say this? And as Rav seems to say, that's the halacha. We treat it as shtei kedusha. V'ha'itmar, but on a different issue, relating to with something you would think would be based on the same idea. Shabbat v'Yom Tov, Rav Amar noda b'zeh asura b'zeh. When we get to Masechet Beitza, we're going to learn why is Beitza all Yom Tov, because it's all about 2 days of Chag, and what happens if a Beitza is born on one? Can you eat it on the other? How do we view 2 Sveikot? We're going to talk about this in the next few Dafim also. But now we're going to say, what if a Beitza is born on Shabbat? Now it's a problem of Nolad. It was built, right? You can't have something that wasn't ready from before. But now, what if it was born on a Shabbat and Yom Tov? They are right next to each other. So it was born one day, which means that the next day, it was kind of prepared from the previous day. Even though the previous day was Chag or Shabbat, it still shouldn't matter, right? So he says, Noda b'zeh, asura b'zeh. If you view them as 2 separate Kedushot, then theoretically, Noda b'zeh should be muteret b'zeh. Okay? So, Amar Rabba, hata mishum hachana. No, the reason here is because things have to be ready from before. Meaning, again, you can't prepare it. Okay? It's like, I was thinking it's like when the kids are little and you say there's 2 days of Chag, okay? Or there's Shabbat and Chag. They assume sometimes, right, there must be a few minutes in between where you could do something, right? Because, oh, well, when Shabbat ends, before Chag starts, can't you do something, right? So it's like that. It's true that they're 2 different sanctities, but still there's no time really to prepare from one to the other. Everything has to be ready from before. How do we know this? Titania. Vayaba yom hashishi v'yichinu. Right? What happened with the man? They got the man, and it said on Friday they had to prepare everything. What do we learn from this? When can you do hachana, prepare? The word hachana comes here, to prepare. You can prepare for all these things on a non-holy day. But you can't prepare from one to the other. So again, this is what we saw before. We brought a contradiction. We said, no, that's a separate issue. Doesn't have to do with, these could be 2 totally separate sanctities, but it doesn't make a difference because you still can't prepare from one to the other. And that's why a Beitza Shenolda has to be ready from before everything starts. Amarle Abaye, so now Abaye comes up with a problem. But look at our Mishnah. What do you mean you can't prepare? Our Mishnah describes that you can prepare. How so? What does he do? Remember the rabbi's opinion? You go the first day, you wait till it gets dark, notes low, then you take your food back. Then you go on the second day and you bring your Eruv back. Is that not preparation? Aren't you on Friday afternoon, which is Yom Tov, preparing your Eruv for Shabbat? How are you allowed to do that if we just said you can't do hachana? Hakamechim miyom tov l'Shabbat. That's preparation. So Amarle Rabba, mi savart sof hayom koneh eruv, tchilat hayom koneh eruv. What is the hachana problem? The hachana problem is when you say, this is my eruv. When does that kick in? When does your eruv kick in? At what moment? It has to be there ben hashmasha, but your eruv kicks in. Remember we had this whole thing? It's not sof hayom. It's not the end of Friday at sunset. It kicks in tchilat hayom. It kicks in starting from that when Shabbat comes in for real at Seder Kochavim. It's true it has to be there the whole time, but it's Tchilat Hayom Kaneh Eruv, in which case what will happen then? You bring your food. They're not concerned with you actually physically bringing the food, I guess, because it's Yantif you can carry, so you can bring food for any reason. So you can carry your food there and you can put it down as your Eruv. But the real moment that the Eruv takes place is when? On Shabbat itself, when 3 stars come out, and Shabbat Mechina Latzma. And then you're not preparing on Yom Tov for Shabbat. Really, your Eruv kicks in when Shabbat starts. So therefore, it's okay. You say, wait a minute. If you're going to say, and this goes back to yesterday's Daf, it's good review. If you're going to say that the Eruv is acquired on Shabbat itself, then I can't remember if it was yesterday or 2 days ago, but then Alame'ata Yarvu Belagin. Remember the lagin? What's that? It was a utensil. That was a tvul yom. It got impure. It went to the mikvah in the morning, but it has to wait till nightfall, till it's 3 stars are out in order to become pure. You have your Levi, you have maaser that you got, but you didn't yet give the truma to the Kohen, and you want to put the truma in that kli called the lagin. The problem is when you put the truma in there, the truma is going to become impure because the kli is still impure. So what do? You say, look, I'm putting the food in here right now, right? You don't want to wait till Shabbat because you can't do truma to maaser. You can't take your truma on Shabbat. So what do? You say, I'm putting this in here right now, and when Shabbat comes in, then my truma, it's going to be truma. So you've done the separation, but it's going to kick in only on Shabbat. What did we say? That works, because then the moment it kicks in when Shabbat starts, the kli is already, the utensil, the lagin is already pure. That's fine. But if you remember what it said there is, ein eruvo eruv. And we had all debate there. Does that mean that sofayom kone eruv, that the eruv really starts before twilight, and therefore this isn't ready before twilight? Because what's the status of this food before twilight? The status of the food is that it's tevel, it's untithed produce, and therefore you can't use your eruv. So there, if you remember, we gave a separate answer, which is the same answer we're going to give here, that you could still say that Seder Kochavim is the time when the stars come out, that it's Konei Eruv, but Be'inan Seudah Ruyami Ba'od Yom V'Leka. You have to have something that was ready and accessible to you before Shabbat started. It's true that your Eruv kicks in on Shabbat, which is why on Yom Tov, in other words, where were we? On Yom Tov, you can set up your Eruv because we assume that you're not really setting it up on Yantif. It's kicking in only when Shabbat starts. So therefore, it's okay to do on Yom Tov because you're not doing hachana, preparation on Yom Tov for Shabbat. However, there's a separate problem here, which is your food, right? In the issue with the lagin, your food has to be prepared from the day before. And that's the issue, okay? And this isn't ready from the day before, even though it kicks in only when Shabbat starts. But now they say, and this is something I made reference to before. If it has to be a sudaru yami ba'od yom, what does that mean? It means the eruv that you put down has to be accessible to you from before, right? From before Shabbat kicks in. Okay, well, let's go back and we're going to have a problem in our Mishnah. Elahaditznan, look at our Mishnah. It says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Yom Tov hasamuch l'Shabbat, bein milfaneh, bein lachareh, whether Yom Tov is before Shabbat or Yom Tov is after Shabbat, Ma'arev Adam Shnei Eruvim. You can put down 2 Eruvs before Yom Tov starts. Now, again, what did we assume? I told you this, that we're making an assumption that we're going to question later. I put 1 2,000 amma that way and 1 2,000 amma that way. Now, what's the problem? If you need a Su'udah, Habi'ina Su'udah Rimu Yami Ba'od Yom. Your food has to be accessible to you from before Shabbat kicks in. Okay, let's say it's Friday Shabbat. The Leika. And in this case, you can't get to that food. Why? If you made your Eruv for Yantif, 2,000 amma in that direction, and you want to now access your food that's 2,000 amma in the other direction, you can't get there. There's 4,000 amma in between your both Eruvs. So your food is not accessible to you at all, right? You can only get to your house, your city, right? Your 2,000 amma from your Eruv, but you can't get another 2,000 amma to get to the other Eruv. So how could that possibly work? So what do they answer? Who said that when he said, put your Eruv there and put your Eruv in, right? You can put Eruv in both directions. He meant each one 2,000 amma from your city. No can do. Lo, what he meant was you can go in both directions, but only if you can get from one to the other. So what would be the case? You put your Eruv 1,000 amot to the east, and another one 1,000 amot to the west, which means that they're each only 2,000 cubits away from each other. So that allows you, basically, you gain an extra 1,000 amma in every direction, right? One on one day and one on the other day, but you can't do 2,000 amma that way and 2,000 amma that way. That will not work. Okay, so now we've reinterpreted what we thought to be before, that you can go 2,000 amma in each direction. No, you definitely can't do that. And right, there's obviously a city in the middle. What we mean is 2,000 amma outside your city limits, right? And then from there, 1,000 in one direction, 1,000 in the other, because you can get to, because you're, right, so then that's a good question. Why, if there's a city in between them, theoretically, you're more than 2,000 amma that way? Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the answer. It's a very good question. Have to think about that. Okay. I'm assuming somehow they think that the city kind of connects them and that it's really okay, that the city kind of makes it as if you're only walking 1,000 and another 1,000. I assume that's how we view it, but it's a good question. Okay, so now we're going to get to one more question. Elahada amar Rabbi Yehuda, irev beraglav yom rishon, ma'arev beraglav yom sheni, irev bepapi yom rishon, ma'arev bepapi yom sheni, hakamichin miyom tov l'shabbat. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he says, if you do your Eruv by just walking there and standing there, okay? If you do that on the first day, whichever it is, Shabbat or Chag, then you do it again on the second day. In other words, it won't cover you for both, but yet you can do it again, okay, on the second day. Or if you did it with bread, you could do it the second day. Okay, the bread is a little easier because you put the bread there and then you kind of took it away, but you could just put it back. But the walking there, now here, we said before, walking is almost a better way of being Konesh Shvita, but it's actually a bit worse because you're kind of undoing it when you go and sleep at home. Because when you bring your food back, it doesn't necessarily mean you're moving your house. But when you sleep somewhere, you're kind of saying, oh, my house is really here. So they're basically saying it's like making a whole brand new Eruv. And then when you go to do your Eruv, let's say it's Friday. So you did it Thursday night, you walk to that spot. And then you want to walk back to the same spot, right? You want to be able to have an Eruv also on Shabbat. So you're allowed to go there. They say, Ha kamichim miyom tov l'Shabbat. Again, aren't you being mechin from Yom Tov l'Shabbat when you go? Now remember what we said. When you put down your food, you have to say, this is my Eruv, I'm being Konesh Shvita. So how do you do that? Aren't you basically preparing for the next day? So they say, now there's a very interesting answer. Mis savar to'il da'azil va'amar midi. Who's to say that you have to, when it says Irev b'raglav, what does it mean? When we put the food down, we said you have to say something. Okay, you have to say, this is Konesh Shvita. But when you go with your feet, okay, right? This is how I'm trying to, I can't remember the phrase, but you prove it with your feet, right? You know, when you actually go physically do something, it's all the more proof. So when you go and you stand there, you don't actually need to say anything, okay? Just standing there is sufficient. And therefore, he says, right, who's to say, why do you think the azil v'amar midi, that you have to go there and actually say something? The azil v'shatik v'yativ. You just go there, you're silent, and you sit, okay? And this is interesting, okay? This comes up, I'll give you another example where this comes up. First, I'll explain the issue. We're basically saying, hachana, what is voting with your feet? Thank you. That was what I couldn't remember. When you go and you stand somewhere, you're not actually doing anything. You're Konesh Shvita, you're accomplishing something, but you're not actually doing anything because you can walk anywhere you want. So you're just walking there. The fact that you're there is Konesh Shvita for you, but it's not, you're not doing hachana. Now it's a little bit tricky because, so you're not actually saying anything. If you said something, it would be what we call hachana, preparation. But what you're doing actually is affecting something very serious and you are actually doing hachana, but yet they don't count it as hachana. I'll give you another good example where this comes up. Shomea ke'oneh. If you listen to someone say a bracha and you don't answer amen, it's as if, right, you just listening, it's as if you answered. So what's a good example? You're in the middle of davening Shmona Esrei and they get to Kedusha, okay, or Kaddish. All those things you're supposed to stop davening. People don't know this, right? They say Kaddish or they just keep davening, but you're supposed to stop and you're supposed to listen, okay? And you basically answer by listening. You're not allowed to speak because you're in the middle of Amidah. So I think it's Tosfot who raises the question there in Brachot. I think we probably learned this because I always found this fascinating. They say, but if you're listening and that's like answering, then you're making a hefsek and you're davening because it's as if you're answering. If you really view it as equal, then it is a problem. It's likewise here. If you really view this as it works, then it should be hachana, but they don't. They say no. Just like shomea ke'oneh is allowed, because it's not really like oneh. It's and here it actually is effective, but since you're not actually doing anything, it works. Okay. So now they say, so here comes this question. Now, so that was the first question. Isn't that hachana? And then they say, kiman, wait, so then who are you going according to? The assumption now is that it's true you're going there, and now we're going to explain a little better why this works, even though the question that I raised this question that we have this problem because you're going there and you're really doing something, even though you're not really doing something. So then they say, kiman. So according to who does this go? It sounds like it only goes according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Ta'amar cheftzei hefker konim shvita. This is a separate machloket between the rabbis and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and it's really about someone who falls asleep. If you fall asleep when Shabbat starts and you're there ben hashmashot, can you say I was kona shvita there, even though you were sleeping? So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says yes. And he says, likewise, cheftzei hefker, they don't need to be your own items. It could be anyone's items that you put down there. It could be kona shvita. Or if you're sleeping, it could be kona shvita. And the rabbis say, no, it has to be your own item. It has to be you're awake. Okay. So it sounds like this is kind of like sleeping because you're not actually doing anything to be kona shvita. So aren't we saying, right? Are we saying this is only like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri? And that's a question because we don't want to be holding like a unique opinion. So they say, no, afilu tema Rabbanan, and now we have an interesting distinction. Ad kan lo pliga Rabbanan alei Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, ela b'yashem, to lo matzeh. If you're sleeping, you can't possibly say, I'm making my Eruv here because you're asleep. Aval b'nei ol, but if you're awake, di bai lemeimar matzeh amar, af agav de lo amar, keman de amar dami. But since you're awake, even though you didn't say anything, since you potentially could have said something, now again, it's funny, because you can't potentially say something, because it's yantif and you're not allowed to say something because that would be hachana. But since theoretically you could open your mouth and say something from a physical perspective and you're not sleeping, they're saying even the rabbis would agree that this would work. It's not the same as sleeping, okay? This is making all these interesting distinctions between someone who can't do something for halachic reasons versus someone who can't do something for physical reasons, right? He's sleeping, so he can't say it. Here he can't say it because it would be hachana. But since he could potentially open his mouth, therefore by standing there, it's as if he said it, and therefore it's as if it would be acquired. And again, we go back to, but it's only acquired, because remember we asked this question before, when it becomes 3 stars come out, right? Otherwise, it would also be hachana. So you go and you stand there, and then it kind of kicks in, and maybe this also answers the question why it's not such a problem, because when it kicks in, it's already Shabbat, okay? You do have to be there before, but it kind of works, it's effective on Shabbat, and then there's no hachana issue. Okay, so we're going to finish here, and we'll pick up tomorrow. Have a good day.